Have you ever wondered where your socks and Tupperware go when you can't find them? Or, in my case, spoons? Maybe into another dimension. Follow me down the rabbit hole into Mel's hole. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we're talking about Mel's hole. This one's a little weird. This one, it definitely gets pretty wild. So let's just do it, okay? Anyway, on February 21st, 1997, Mel Waters called into an AM radio show called Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. So Art Bell founded and hosted this like paranormal themed radio show. It was basically where everyone could talk about conspiracy theories before the internet. And he had like 10 million listeners. When Mel called in, he called in to talk. He actually sent a fax first, but he wanted to talk about this hole that was on his property. And it's not considered a well because no water has been found in the hole. So a well would technically have water at the bottom of it, or like a dried well would have at one point had water in it. But it seems like this hole never did, although it looked like a well. So during his first call, this portion of the radio program kind of opened with Art explaining that he received a fax about a mystery hole in eastern Washington. So more specifically, Mel lived about 9 miles outside of Ellensburg, Washington, in the Monastash Ridge, which is just like a mountainy area. The thing about this hole is that it never seemed to fill up. So at the time of the recording, which was 1997, Mel had lived on the property for several years. He said he didn't specifically say how many years he had lived there, but the people that lived there before him had lived there for like 30 or 40 years. So in that whole time, all the neighbors, everyone threw things into the hole. All their trash went into the hole, like everything went into this hole. Mel does assume, because of the ease in which everyone around him threw things in the hole, that the previous owners also threw things in the hole and allowed everyone to throw stuff in. Everyone was doing it. So it seems like that's just what people did. Well, Mel had a hobby of shark fishing, which is kind of a cool hobby. And since he had noticed that the hole wasn't filling up, he decided to just see how deep it is. Like, it just seems, for years and years, people are throwing things down here and it's not filling up. And yes, things will compost over time and kind of like compress. But 50 years worth of people throwing things, I'm exaggerating a little bit on the time frame, but like about 50 years of people throwing things down this well or hole, excuse me. And it never fills up. Seems a little weird. So he hooked like a 1 pound weight to the end of his line and he dropped it down the hole. He thought for sure that the hole couldn't be deeper than the line, but boy, was he wrong. So he dropped one full reel of line down and then he didn't hit the bottom. And for reference, Mel said that his spool of line is about 5,000 yards. So when he let out the first like 1,500 yards of line and he didn't hit bottom, he reeled it all back up, attached some lifesavers to the line, and then cast it back down. So the thinking here was that if there was water at the bottom, the lifesavers would dissolve. And he said that it's like an old fishing trick that you would, to chum the water, you would basically like attach a balloon or to attach lifesavers to a balloon. Eventually, like the lifesavers would melt and the balloon would fall or something. I don't know. But it was an old fishing trick. But the thing is, like when he reeled the line back up, the lifesavers were 100% still intact. So he didn't hit water, which is why it's for sure not a well. So he put the weight back on it and he sent it back down the hole. He ended up dropping down an estimated of 80,000 feet into the hole. And the line just like keeps dropping, never hitting bottom. And from the sounds of the very first call, it sounds like he would go out there because at the time he wasn't living on the property. he was living in Ellensburg, Washington, and so he would drop some more line down and then he would, leave again or whatever. He'd go back every night or whatever. I don't know. But it sounded like he was going out there, dropping down line, and then going back to wherever he was sleeping at night. He did make sure to rig up like a cross member at the top of the well, or the top of the hole, so the line dropped straight down and wouldn't catch on the sides. Again, makes total sense. But Mel, he noticed all kinds of weird things. So he noticed that no echo ever came from the hole. So he could yell, and as one would typically do. You go into a hole, you see a hole, you yell into it. Everyone does it. Human nature, I guess. We all just yell into holes because we like to hear the echo. But he would never hear any sounds, any rumbling, because that was one of Art's questions. Do you hear sounds coming from this hole? Do you hear anything weird? And Mel was like, no, I never even hear my own echo. Nothing comes from the hole. And his dogs would never go near the hole. In fact, Mel would hook his dogs to the leash, and he would try to get them closer to the hole, and he said they would dig their feet into the ground. They didn't want to go anywhere near the hole. They were adamant. And he said typically the dogs were right next to him. Anytime he went anywhere, typically his dogs were right there next to him. They didn't really need a leash normally because they just were next to their owners. But anytime they were on the property, if he was near that hole, they were staying near his car. They wouldn't even come close to the hole. They wouldn't follow him at all. And he asked around and realized no wildlife or pets of any kind would ever go near the hole. Birds would fly around the hole. They would never go over it. There wasn't a bug or anything near this hole. No, but the weird thing is that the animals avoided the area, but plants thrived near this hole. Plants grew so well. It's just really, which is really bizarre, You think that if animals aren't going near, that maybe it's toxic and the plants would die, but nope, that wasn't the case. He also said that radios acted weird near this hole. At first, they would get all staticky, right? So he would have this radio, it would get staticky, and then it would start picking up, he called old-time music. So I don't know exactly how old-time music was for him in 1997, but he went to change the channel on this radio. He changed the channel from the old time music and he tuned into a baseball game. He's like, all right, cool, whatever. And he started listening to this baseball game. But the thing that's really weird is that it wasn't just any baseball game. This was a game that was played in 1967. So 30 years prior to when he's tuning into this radio. What kind of signal? Maybe somebody's broadcasting a live version. I don't know. It's weird, right? And for a while, Mel did think that maybe this hole was a mine shaft of at some point it had been a mine shaft. But the problem with that was that the opening had been just very well maintained. And I don't know why that was a problem, but he seemed to be it can't be mine shaft because it was too well maintained. So it looks like a well opening, which is why people call it a well often. So it had a wall of sorts built around it, like a retaining wall, and that was about 3.5 feet, and it was stone. And then it was stone for about 15 feet down, like a well would be. And then it turned to dirt and then rocks and stuff like that. But Mel could only see as far as his super powerful flashlight could show. He couldn't see further. And so he saw the well, or the retaining wall end. And then he saw the soil, and then he saw where it turned to rocks, but that was it. He can't see too far down. It's a hole.
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's try.melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way. Menopausal and perimenopausal women, listen up. It's time to take control of your health and comfort, and Winona is here to help. Winona is a telemedicine company for menopause care who believes that your symptoms are real, important, and deserve to be taken seriously. And for many women, this starts with hormone replacement therapy. Winona's HRT is made with plant-based, bioidentical hormones rather than synthetic ones, so it better aligns with your body to offer relief from hot flashes, weight gain, and other uncomfortable symptoms. 80% of women who use Winona find relief within just 90 days. So, what are you waiting for? Get started today. Visit buywinona.com today to start your free visit. With free shipping and the ability to pause or cancel at any time, your path to wellness has zero obligations. Use code SPRING24 at buywinona.com for 25% off your first treatment plan. That's BYWINONA.com for 25% off. Winona, menopause care made easy.
So Art suggested a laser, but quickly decided that 80,000 feet down, a laser just like wouldn't really work if it just like keeps going and going. Because they're trying to figure out like the bottom of this thing. Like there's got to be an end. And then Art suggested sending a person down the hole. And Mel brought up a good point that it's unknown if like the air quality is good or what the pressures would be like at the like that deep into the ground. And it's kind of like creepy, like scary. And they did have somebody call into the show. And you can still listen to this first call and his second call. One of my show notes has like the Coast to Coast AM. It's still a show, but it has a different host now. But you can go to the Art Bell vault and listen to his old radio programs. I only found the first 2 calls. Apparently there was like 5 I think calls over 5 years, or 6 calls maybe over 5 years. There's supposed to be more, but there wasn't. We're gonna get there. But one of the creepiest things about this hole is that it can bring things back to life. Yep, I did say that. You heard me correctly. It's a resurrecting hole. So the neighbor took his dog, and his dog was dead. He threw the body of his dog into this hole. That neighbor was a hunter and often would hunt in the woods around the area. So he was often like just out there trying to find things. And it's a pretty rural area. So it's not like there's a lot of people in the area. And that's why all the neighbors could just throw all their stuff into this hole, because it wasn't like there wasn't a lot of them. While this neighbor was hunting, he saw his dead dog running in the woods. Which he's like, well, no way, because my dog's dead and I threw him into that hole. So that can't be my dog. But how did he know it was his dog? Good question. I'm glad you asked. Well, in a lineup, I don't know about you, but I can spot my own dog. I look over and I'm like, yep, that one's mine. But if that's not like a good enough reason, the dog was still wearing his collar with his tag. The thing is, though, the dog didn't come when the owner called it. And in fact, the dog acted as if he didn't know the owner at all and like ran away, was scared of this guy calling him. This guy's like, that's my dog. Like, come here, buddy. Like, I love you. I miss you. I can't believe you're alive. Like, did I mess up and throw my live dog into the hole? Nope. Dog was just completely different. So after Mel gave all of his information, or all the information he had about the hole on Art's show, Art started asking people to call in and like give their opinions on this. So someone called into the show, and Art and Mel were on the line, and he had looked up in the encyclopedia that the Mariana Trench was the deepest point in the world at the time. And we did that other episode on the hole to hell. So that is now technically the deepest hole, because we don't know how deep this hole is. But he also told them that using the technology that they had in 1997, they could only dig 1,600 feet down. So his reel should have stopped just past that 1,500 mark, just past the first spool. But he said he put like so many spools down there. And like I said before, another caller called in, was like asked to be lowered into the hole. He said he would do it under like very strict circumstances, that he would be like in a cage, and there had to be like a automatic like up button. So if he started like something happened, that he could just click and it would go all the way up to the top. But if it's that deep, again, like, I don't know how fast you're going to get up there. Radar was suggested from a caller, and the caller suggested that Art use his like resources to get some sort of radar out at the hole. And then the next caller said to lower down recording devices to see if there are any like gases, or like to get the temperature, to get more information before lowering anything else down. But that same caller said that radar would work too, so you should lower all these recording devices and use radar. Art wasn't convinced that the radar would work because he thought that it would bounce off the holes, or the wall of the hole. But anyway, these were just suggestions from the callers. Like, people, they don't really know a whole lot, and I mean, they're just random people, right? And maybe they do, but we're just going to assume that nobody is educated in this type of hole because it's never been heard of before. So then there was another call, right? Like a couple days later, Mel called back. Mel had given just enough clues as to where the hole was during the first broadcast. I mean, he didn't give out the exact location, but it's not too hard to find. I am somewhat familiar with the area, and I could probably go out there and find it. I don't live in Washington anymore, so I haven't gone here. Like, I went to the Georgia Guidestones. That was really cool when I visited Georgia. So maybe next time I go to Washington, I'll see if I can find Mel's hole. But the next day, so after the very first broadcast, the next day, Mel was headed out to his property like he did every day, and the entrance was blocked. Guess who showed up? The government. They must have heard the broadcast, and they were super interested in this hole. They wanted it all for themselves, which, like, seems like a very governmental thing to do. Thanks, government. So Mel had like noticed helicopter activity around the property over the next couple days. Like, he was trying to figure out what were they doing, what was going on. There was evidence that the government had brought some pretty heavy machinery. And what they told Mel was that there was a plane crash on the property and they were recovering it. And they told him that he couldn't access his property until the plane crash had been fully investigated, which seems odd, but okay. Like, there was no reports of a down plane, but fine, we'll go with your theory here for a second. So then Mel was like, hey, I want to talk to whoever's in charge here. Like, I'm not believing what you're telling me. I'm not buying it here. So this guy in civilian clothes, mind you, which just like reeks like FBI or something. I don't know. It reeks one of those 3-letter agencies. This guy told him that the land wasn't necessarily his anymore, and that it would be easy to find a drug lab on the property or something of that nature if Mel didn't leave. Mel threatened to go to the press, and the man said, go ahead, do it. Like, no one's going to believe you. Well, Art Bell and his audience would believe him. After all, they are very conspiracy-minded folks, right? So he went back on the Art Bell show. And he explained about all the government activity. He had said at one point that going on Art's show was the worst mistake he ever made in his whole life. And Mel said that the neighbors had seen this solid black beam coming up from the hole and going like up into the clouds. Darker than anything they'd ever seen before. Like this dark black beam. What is that? Like, what the heck? So then callers are calling in. They're like giving him all these thoughts of what this hole could be. Was it like a tunnel to Hollow Earth? Was it a portal to another dimension? One caller even told Mel that he should stop calling in because it's too dangerous, and obviously the government is listening. And Mel should have heeded a freaking warning, because this guy, okay, Mel Waters is not very intelligent, because he keeps calling in to this radio show that has 10 million listeners, and obviously the government found you after the very first night. Like, the next day they were on your property. Anyway, if you have something like this, please come on my show. Anyway, so Mel was scheduled after the second call. He was scheduled for a third call, like another update call with the Art Bell show. But on the day he was supposed to appear, he was a no-show, and he wasn't picking up his phone. So Art Bell had his phone number after the fax that Mel had sent him a couple faxes. So he had the phone number to call Mel on, like, when his show was airing. And Mel was quoted at some point saying, quote, "They took everything from me. My land, my money, my family, Everything's gone. Well, 3 years later, Mel finally resurfaced. So he told, this is all on the radio show that he kept going on. He kept going on Art's radio show. He said he was offered $3 million a year to lease his property to someone. We don't really know who he was leasing his property to. But the deal was he would sign a non-disclosure agreement and leave the country and never return. And so he did. He did that. He was like, deal, I'm in, I'm gone, I'm gone. And he lived in Australia for about 2.5 years. But then he started to miss his family and decided to come back to the States. So at this point, guys, I know during the very first call, Mel said that his wife worked for the local university that is in Ellensburg, Washington. So I know that he has a wife. I am not 100% sure if he took his wife with him to Australia, which makes sense to me, or if he had to leave everybody behind. But I do know like his whole family, like his extended family and everybody like that was back stateside, obviously. So even if he took his wife with him, and it sounded like maybe they didn't have any kids, everybody else is still in Washington or at least stateside. So he came back because he missed everybody. And he was warned not to do this. They told him, don't come back. And he did it anyways. So during this time that he came back, he got in touch with Art Bell and agreed to come back on the radio. But then he never showed up again. On the day Mel was supposed to return to the show, and now this is the second no-show that he hasn't shown up, he was on this bus to go see his nephew. And I don't know where the bus was headed, but there was some sort of altercation on the bus and the police were called. So everyone that was on that bus got on a new bus, including Mel. But then Mel blacked out. The next thing he knew, he was in San Francisco and 12 days had passed. So he woke up in an alley. His keys and wallet were missing. And remember, these are the days before cell phones, so it wasn't like he had a cell phone to be missing as well. But everything that he knew was missing. And then he was like he was groggy. He was kind of coming to, and as he was coming to, he was like, wow, my arm really hurts. So he pulled up his sleeve and he realized that he had like tape marks and needle holes from an IV. And at first when I heard like needle holes, I was like, oh, they drugged him. But I mean, an IV makes sense too, because you can easily drug somebody through an IV. And then like, again, he's still coming to, he's trying to like get out of this grogginess because he's obviously been passed out for 12 days. He is tasting some blood in his mouth and he realized that his back teeth were missing. Why did they take his back teeth? I don't know. Like, that's a weird thing. I understand like keeping him drugged up, but also then you released him. So what did you expect? You could have just disappeared him. I guess this isn't communist China. Mel never made it back to his property. But you remember the threats from earlier? Like the legal action? They decided, well, because you came back and you were dumb and you didn't listen to us and you didn't just take our $3 million and just like run away. $3 million a year? That's still good money now. Can you imagine what that would be in like the year 2000? Like, it's good money. So there was legal action taken against Mel for illegal construction on the property. Things like power lines, septic tanks, paved roads. And he didn't build any of these things. The government had the property for the last 2 years. So they were the ones that built the power lines, built the septic tanks, built the paved roads. But also like power lines. What? You need the electric company to come out and run the power lines. So like, anyway, that just seems ridiculous. I feel like that could be dismissed in court pretty easily. But I bet that Mel probably couldn't afford a lawyer because they had drained all of the money that he had been receiving. They drained it out of his account. He had no more money left. So even if he wanted to fight these people that were claiming all these things, like he literally couldn't because he didn't have the money to hire a lawyer. So the Art Bell show had reported that a TV crew had gone out to the property and they never found the hole, but they did find a lot of boot prints and evidence that something had happened there. They found like yellow gear, like construction gear. They found a lot, like there was a lot of rustling around of the property. You could tell that there was a lot of activity, but no hole. And also a no-fly zone was put in over the area. In fact, TerraServer, which is like Google Earth before Google Earth, showed an aerial view of the area, and over like where the hole would have been was a white block. So they could not show you that section of the world. It's just blocked out. So skeptical callers said that Mel like could have just found this blocked out part of the map and claimed that was his property and this was a hole and he just made this whole thing up. Well, the problem with that is that the TerraServer wasn't launched until 6 months after his first call, and his consistency was on point. Like, he never once strayed from where his property was or where like what was going on. He had the same story from beginning to end. Well, there might have been a second hole. This is where the story gets really, really bizarre. So if you thought it was weird before, it's gonna get worse now. So a Native American tribe had approached Mel and asked him to come to Nevada to investigate another hole. So the second hole wasn't on Native American land, but it was on public land that was used by the Basque. So the Basque are a group of southwestern European people who like immigrated to the US in the 1800s, and they are called Basque because of the language they speak. And so I will be referring to them as like the Basque or the Basque people, just so you kind of know who I'm talking about. And they're not the Native Americans that brought Mel down. They were kind of working together in conjunction to try to figure out like, what the heck is this thing? And they used the public land for raising sheep because they're shepherds and that's what they did with their lives. So the second hole was a little bit different than Mel's hole. It also had like a 9 feet like diameter. Like, it was a 9-foot opening in diameter. But instead of having a retaining wall, it had this like metal collar. And this collar, like this, it was like warm. And granted, they are in Nevada, so maybe it was just warm because of the sun. But it was always like the same temperature. It was consistent. So every time you touched it, it felt the exact same, but it was like warm, very warm. It could be the dead of night. It could be a snowstorm. I don't know. Do you guys get snowstorms in Nevada? Anyway, that's not relevant. So they started doing experiments at this hole. They were like, we need to figure out more information. And I mean, who wouldn't, right? Everybody wants to figure out more information. So they started by lowering down a bucket of ice. But they're smart, they're gonna conduct their experiments intelligently. So they kept some ice at the top of this hole, and just like sitting next to the hole as a control. So as soon as that ice that they kept at the top of the hole melted, they reeled up the ice that they lowered down in the bucket. Well, this is like the weird thing. The ice in the bucket wasn't melted at all. And also, it wasn't cold anymore, and it didn't feel like water. The ice felt more like large pieces of salt. So then they were like, well, let's try to melt the ice over an open flame. But it didn't melt. It caught on fire. But it burned for months. This ice salt thing burned for months. And one of the Basque even took the flaming ice to his cabin to keep warm. He put it in his like little stove in his cabin just to keep warm. And it just kept burning forever and ever, it felt like. So they sent more buckets of ice down in the hole. They were like trying to see, does this happen every time? Like, what is this ice thing? Like this, this salt, what is going on? What they found is about 2/3 of the time the ice would act as we expect ice to act, right? So it would melt and it would be water when they brought it up. Totally normal. It would probably be a little bit cold, probably. Totally fine, normal ice. Well, 1/3 of the time, the ice would transform into this salt-like substance. It would still look just like the ice that they put down. So it didn't matter which shape you put down this hole, it would have that same shape. But it was like salt, almost like a salt rock. Now at that point, one of the Basque people volunteered to go down the hole. They're like, something weird is going down there. We need to go down there and figure it out. And everyone agreed that probably was not a very good idea, which that's probably for the best, right? So they did decide that they have an extra sheep or two. So let's just like send a sheep down. So they put a sheep in a cage and they lowered it down 1,000 feet, which I think that's exactly how far they were also lowering down the ice. 1,000 feet. So they lowered down the sheep and they left it there for 30 minutes. During this 30 minutes, like, first of all, the sheep's moving like crazy. It's like, I'm in the cage and I'm being lowered and it's freaking out. Like you would expect a sheep to act in this situation, or literally like anything to act in this situation. But then the sheep stopped moving, like the cage stopped moving, everything stopped moving. They did start to feel this like humming sensation, which they thought was weird, but they left the sheep down there for 30 minutes. That was their thing. They were like, we're going to do it for 30 minutes and we're going to see what happens. After the 30 minutes, they brought the sheep back up and it looked fine. It didn't look, it was dead, but it looked like fine, like nothing crazy had happened to it. Well, the Basque, being shepherds, they know how to butcher the sheep. So they took it over to a table and they're like, all right, let's open this sucker up and see what happened. The first thing they noticed is that the sheep looked like it had been cooked from the inside out, which is weird. And taking up almost the entirety of the sheep's body, the inside, was what Mel described as like a tumor. But then the tumor started moving. Guys, I told you this is going to get weird. Whew. It's getting weird. It's getting really weird. Hold on to your britches there, people. It's getting strange here. So naturally they're like, okay, why the heck is this thing moving? This sheep is dead. So they cut open the tumor, and what they found inside is what was described as a fetal seal. Like the animal, like a seal. And it was attached to the tumor with an umbilical cord, like it was in a gestational sac. And the seal had eyes of like a human. So not like seal eyes, like human eyes. It's really freaky. I don't know. So Mel described this whole thing as like, it's like almost like a spiritual event. Something, it changed his life. It was so, it was amazing for him. And actually the Basque end up thinking that this was a very spiritual thing that happened. I don't know. It was weird. So they watched this like seal-like creature as it moved towards the end of the table. So the Mel thought like, this seal wants to go back to the hole. So he picked it up and set it near the hole, which like, don't touch it. I wouldn't touch it. Like what the heck? We sent the sheep down, totally normal. It comes back up dead, which they probably expected a little bit, which is why they didn't send a person down there. But instead we have this seal with the eyes of a human, and it's staring at us. And it did. So Mel explained that the creature was slimy, which makes sense if it was in a gestational sac, and it smelled like ozone. I don't know exactly what the ozone smells like. I guess just like outside. I don't know. That's how he described it. And they basically, the creature and the men, like they just stared at each other for about 2 hours. This creature stared at these men, and the men obviously stared back at the creature. And then this like seal thing, gave this final look and jumped into the hole. It's like, gotta go, bye. Okay, but you do want to hear the craziest part? Like, I know, because you're probably like, okay, Danny, that was crazy. Like, it can't get weirder. But it does. I told you, this one's a weird one. So before Mel went to Nevada, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. Okay, fine, right? People get cancer, whatever. After this experience with this like seal creature thing, he was cancer free. He honestly, like, he thinks that the seal cured him of his cancer. And I'm wondering, like, there were other people around. Did any of them have like a chronic illness or an illness of any sort and they got healed? Or is it because like Mel actually touched this seal and the seal was like, got your cancer? Like, I don't know. It's just weird. Okay, but I don't know. We're gonna just change back to this like ice thing. So you remember the ice that was on fire? This like ice that turned to salt rock thing that they set it on fire. Well, the guy, he took it back with him to his cabin, put it in the stove to keep warm. He noticed that the ice kept pulling all the moisture out of the air. So like he had super dry skin And Nevada's already like a drier climate, but he had like extra dry skin. He was always thirsty. And you would put like boiling water next to this stove that had this ice thing in it. And all the steam would go towards it was like being absorbed almost into this ice, which is just an odd thing that's not something that typically happens. But also ice doesn't typically burn for months at a time if it burns at all. There's a whole conspiracy theory about that, which is why I said that way. But anyway, so one day the stove collapsed through the floor of the cabin, but it was still pretty warm and it was working still, just being under the cabin. So instead of like picking up the stove, bringing it back in the cabin and patching the whole thing, he patched up the hole like as much as necessary and then kind of left a little bit of a hole for the warmth to come up. Then he left the stove under his cabin. And then a couple weeks later, he was coming home and his cabin was just like burnt down. It was a pile of dust when he got there. So it wasn't like smoldering, it wasn't smoking, it was just a pile of dust. So this guy moved in with his brother. He was like, I don't know what happened, but my cabin is just burnt down. A few weeks after that, he went back to his cabin and found that the stove was 5 feet in the ground. Like maybe this ice that's on fire is like being pulled towards the center of the earth. Like these holes are going that deep. Maybe it's creating another hole, endless bottomless pit. I don't know. But all I know is they had a lot of trouble getting the stove out of the ground. And it literally took a crane to get this stove out of the ground. 5 feet. So it's not like it's pretty deep, like, but not that deep. It's only 5 feet. Took a crane to get this wood-burning stove out of the ground. And then the Basque, like at this point, claimed that they had been visited multiple times by the creature from the hole, like the seal creature thing. And they also were seeing brightly colored birds that were circling the hole, but these birds couldn't be shot down. Like they were immune to bullets or something. Like they could not be. So of course they see these brightly colored birds, are like, let's shoot them. But they couldn't be shot down. The Basque believed that the seal creature was communicating with them through a series of beeps and clicks through the radio, and somehow they understood the beeps and clicks, and I'm not exactly sure how, but the creature warns the Basque that the ice is dangerous and can't fall into the wrong hands because it will possibly destroy the world if it does. So that's really reassuring news, as this ice with the stove is like being pulled down into something. Of course, all this being told on the Art Bell show. So, I mean, it's just hearsay. And Art is curious if there is a recording of this language, if all this is true. He's trying to figure out, like, can you give us some evidence? Luckily, the Basque recorded everything. According to Mel, the Basque recorded everything. He agreed that he was going to go. He was going to get some, like, this recording. He was going to get pictures and any evidence he can get his hands on, and he would be back on the show. But Mel was never heard from again. Like, after that, again, he just, like, disappeared off the face of the planet. 5 years of adventures with these holes, and that was just the end of it. And this was a wild tale. And many believe that it was just a tale. But the thing is, like, Art tried to trip Mel up. But Mel's story stayed so consistent. He couldn't be tripped up. Everything was exactly the way. And even when, like, if he asked a question, it was incorrect, then Mel would, like, no, like this. And he would go back to his original story, which is weird. And you can hear Mel's calls on the Art Bell show. But the thing is, like, Melvin Waters doesn't exist. There is no Melvin Waters or Mel Waters in this area to have ever existed. Of course, you look at Google Earth over this area, and you can now, like, it's no longer blocked out. It's no longer a no-fly zone. But also, if they covered up the hole, if they did something with the hole, then it wouldn't be a no-fly zone anymore, because kind of like they just needed, like, the hype to die down before they could make it a fly zone again. And once Google Earth came around, they're like, it's not that big a deal anymore because we covered it up. And people are interested in this hole. It's crazy. This hole is crazy. It blows my mind. Everything about it. So, as much as I want you to come on my show and tell me your craziest stories, if something like this is happening to you, please don't call me. Please don't, because I don't want you to end up like Mel Waters. Like, where is he? Does anybody know? Has anybody heard from this guy? Is he just gone? Did they disappear him? I know this isn't communist China, but the CIA is pretty good at disappearing people. I should not say that on my show because they will find me and disappear me. Anyway, that's it. That's the whole. That's Mel's whole. I don't know what to even believe here. Was it real? Was it not real? What happened? Can I go find it? We have some family in the area. Maybe I'll fly out to Washington and try to go find this thing because it would be a really cool little picture to post for you guys. But anyway, until next time, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all next week. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.